All right, welcome to NetBox Heroes. This is a podcast that's inspired, of course, by the NetBox community, the network automation community, where we're learning from some of the awesome networking professionals in our community. I'm Chris Beavers. I'm the CEO of NetBox Labs. I'm going to be your host today. Just a reminder for everybody, our goal with NetBox Heroes, it's to learn about the people in the NetBox community, how they've developed in their careers as network engineers or networking pros, what the networks that they're working with are like, some of the problems they've tackled or are tackling, how NetBox and other tech fits into their stack, and stuff like that. I'm really excited today. We've got Charles Kozler joining me here. Charles has been in IT and in networking for pretty much his whole career, over more than 15 years right now. Charles is the Director of Network and Systems Engineering at Flyer Financial Technologies. Charles there, he's overseeing all the network, the systems, the cybersecurity operations for Flyer FT's global trading network. I happen to know Charles is a pretty sophisticated user at NetBox and NetBox Cloud, actually. We got to have some time together last week with a bunch of other NetBox Labs customers for a customer advisory session. So I already know that Charles has a lot of interesting stuff underway. Thanks, Charles, for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Okay, well, I'm going to get us off to the races. So maybe I'll start, Charles, just by asking you to just tell us a little about yourself and what you're up to.
Um, so about me, I've been on a computer since I was probably 6 or 7. Really kind of jumped off my career into actually like lower level programming, like C, C++, assembly, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I took that with me into college, and then actually in college is where I transitioned into networking. Once I graduated with my degree and I came into Flyer, I took over the whole network, and at that time, it had only been one cabinet in one data center in New Jersey. Now we're up to I think about 5 cabinets, 4 data centers, and number of cloud regions and stuff that we support. Um, so yeah, so that's where I'm at now.
One thing I'm sort of curious about, you mentioned that, you started on the programming side and in college you decided to transition the focus to networking. Tell us a little about that. Like what drew you to networking, both as a profession and just as an interest, if you remember.
Um, I I actually had made the commitment to move into networking for 2 reasons. One, I'm not that great at math and science, right? I can do calculus here and there, but engineering, physics, Calc 3, I couldn't hack it. And then when I started looking at networking, all this programming knowledge that I had obtained over the few years at that time, I realized my networking skills were basically non-existent, right? Like I could understand, routing, gateway, but then like once I started thinking about like the services that lay on top of that with like DHCP and subnet mask, routing, gateway, like I understood it, but I didn't get it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't, confidently speak to it. So I saw it as a challenge. I saw it as,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm not saying I knew everything about programming, far shot from it, but I had been getting bored at that time. I was around 19, yeah, 18, 19 when I made the switch, and I had been programming for about 6 or 7 years at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just, like I said, I saw it as a challenge, and I wanted to see, how it could challenge me and what I could learn and where it would bring me.
Hmm. That's really fascinating. So, another thing you mentioned is sounds like you came out of the gate kind of hot, right? Like you went straight into networking, right to Flyer FT. Is that the case? Right after college, and so you almost immediately like were uh, practical network engineer, and you have been in this interesting situation, and we're going to explore it in a little bit of almost end to end building out this footprint for Flyer FT. Now that said, I'm curious if you remember, like when you came out of college and straight into that, like you own the network situation. What were some of the challenges? Like what were some of the things that um, you maybe had to adapt to or pick up pretty quickly that you didn't get in the academic environment, but that really kind of hit you in the practical environment?
Um, I would say that, when I arrived at Flyer, I hadn't had any real exposure. Actually, I had no exposure to enterprise grade equipment, right? Like Juniper. Juniper does things a lot
Mm,
different than Cisco Linux home routers, right? Um, so one of the things was, I think, expanding my knowledge and expanding my understanding of certain things. Like I knew what a VPN was, right? But I didn't know what Ike and IPsec phase one, phase two. I
mhm,
didn't understand all these different concepts that affect network connectivity. And when you're doing the connectivity that my organization, maintains, uh, between the hours of roughly 7 a.m. and 6, 7 o'clock at night, it's a pretty critical time,
mm,
and things shouldn't be going down. Um, and troubleshooting those problematic VPNs, right? And then trying to work with VPNs from a provider standpoint, I was dropped into this, in a number of new ways that I had not yet encountered. One of which was
mm,
customer facing. I mean, I had been in customer support and stuff like that, but I'm customer facing, speaking on technologies that I just barely understand, like the
mhm,
Juniper firewalls and the VPNs and stuff like that. Um, and then, second to that was identifying where we could be doing things better. One of the first things that I had acknowledged and understood after joining Flyer FT was that our network was completely flat. We had two subnets. We had one in the office and one in production, and that was it.
mhm,
So uh, as a part of growing that and maturing it, the very first project I undertook, which was a challenge in and of itself, because I had no documentation, I had nothing, I had to trace wires through walls, um, was to set up proper VLANing, proper subnetting within our office, right? We had different departments, and just because we could see each other 4 or 5 chairs away didn't mean that that wasn't sales and that wasn't dev and this was operations. We still very much had different departments. So that was one of the first projects I undertook, was essentially redoing the entire office network, and then that was kind of my jump off for targeting production. And then that was the next thing I did was, setting up proper VLANs, proper zoning, proper firewalling, VPN, all that stuff, and really growing and maturing it and getting it ready for the next iteration.
Something you're kind of bridging to that I also wanted to chat with you about a little bit. Like, I've been lucky to talk with folks who've had all kinds of different career paths into and through networking. You have had this, real end-to-end journey with Flyer, especially, and you talked about there a little, like how you dove in and started to have an impact, and then how you started to expand that impact toward, like the production network, after refining and maturing, the corporate side. Now your role has expanded a lot over the years. Like, what's that path been like? What's driven you to take on more, system side, on the security side? How has, like that networking core and focus like helped you as you've grown in the role over time? Just tell us a little about that path.
Um, I guess to some degree or another, I could say now that uh, I I probably saw myself going towards the cybersecurity, parts of my job, and I don't want to say industry because it's a massive industry, and
Hmm.
um, but because I was managing all of the firewalls, the networking, the security, before security was a hot topic where everybody was running IDSs, IPSs, host-based intrusion detection systems, all that. Um, I had already kind of started seeing myself gravitate towards doing things secure and doing things right and doing it from the beginning, because already I had seen what happens when you kind of make those
Mm,
short-term, architectural decisions, and how long they can actually affect you and drag a problem, or create and introduce multiple problems that then all get chained together. Um, so I've always been one to do things with technology right from the first time, even if it's a little rushed, but just to get the
Mm,
get the proof of concept out, get the proof of concept secure. Um, and then with cybersecurity, I just feel that it's where I have most of my relevancy right now because we are doing so many expansions into different cloud providers. So we just most recently had expanded into Azure, but all of this has cybersecurity kind of as the foundation.
at its
Because
core, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And if you have a weak core or a weak foundation, then everything else kind of above and below is going to be a challenge. So I acknowledge that having the cybersecurity, a strong cybersecurity, kind of helps me give me that backbone that I need for my network core and my network backbone.
Yeah, kind of what I hear there is, it's been a natural, almost like role expansion for you to cover these broader, requirements for the infrastructure for the business because you've thought about them on a foundational basis, even as you've built the network, right? Like you've thought about the security of the network and its security posture from the beginning of building it out, and it ends up being a natural extension. That's really helpful. So one thing I'd like to do now, Charles, is actually, I guess I have one more like career type question for you, and something that I know our community really values hearing from folks like you who have been at this some time. Like if you could like go back in time and share some sort of lesson with yourself that you've learned along the way, but that you would impart to others who are just at the outset of their careers in networking. Um, any big thoughts, any big lessons that you think are really important to share with others?
Um, Stay passionate, stay hungry. Um, Especially now, in this day and age where all technology, everybody is connected, technology can become exhausting in and of itself with it,
Mm,
being used all day. So it's a little bit easy to lose that passion. Um, Me specifically, I'm very passionate about technology and about, IT. I'm a very logistical or logical top-down thinker, which is why I like technology. Um, but really, only you are going to push you to
mm,
continue to keep going. And for me, it's that inquisitiveness, that oh well, let's see that engineer brain, like oh can we do this? Oh can we do that? And then just kind of seeing where that grows and use that to grow yourself, your skill set, and your professional experiences as well.
that's great. A word, you use the word inquisitiveness, which I really love. Another word I use a lot is curiosity, right? Like you have to create the room for yourself to be curious and inquisitive so that you can stay passionate. I think that's really important. Um, all right. Well, why don't we start to talk tech a little bit? One of the maybe foundational things I'd love to pick your brain on. You've already started to broach this a little bit. Just tell us a little bit about your network. I know you and I were talking a little while ago, and you mentioned this network is effectively your baby, right? Like you've built it from, I think you said one rack or cage, and it's evolved over time. So tell us a little about it.
Um, there's a lot of places to start. So yeah, it started out as the one cabinet, the flat network, and the next iteration of that was our secondary site, which was at the time in Boston. Um, and then about 7 years ago, we opened up our third site in Chicago. And then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we opened the other site in Dallas. But the growth into these different locations had direct business impact, right? So or I'm sorry, business reasons and justification.
Hmm.
So we went to Chicago because Chicago Mercantile, just CME is there, right? A lot of our customers were also in 350 Cermak and everything like that. So that served us for that purpose, but uh, the main purpose that it served for me and the operations folks was US East 2. We were eyeing that as our production AWS. And I had always been in the camp that I would not extend our network into hybrid networks unless we were directly attached to those clouds, meaning
Mm,
AWS Direct, Azure Express Route. Um, and this requirement, I kept that requirement firm because I had already seen how often things got leaked online with, buckets and S3 buckets and open databases, and
mm,
I just was not letting that become a possibility. So rather than take it, a hybrid cloud and call it a hybrid cloud, no, I mean, I did make it a hybrid cloud, but our clouds don't have public access to the internet. They have to go through my firewalls. And this is how every time we get a new customer requirement that comes in, that's kind of how we do these like expansions, right? Like we kind of see where we need to grow a little bit, and then with the help of some of the people I've worked with for 10, 15 years at Flyer, we then start to look at the whole picture and we try to look at, okay, how else can we spin this little pinhole of a customer request? How can we spin this into a much larger, you know, um, infrastructure platform for
mm,
us, right? So that's what we did with Azure, right? So AWS, our expansion for applications, I'm sorry, our expansion to host additional applications was into AWS. About 2 years ago, we were doing a construction on our office, and um, we needed a way to provide better remote access than what was currently being used during the pandemic. This is where Azure Virtual Desktop came. So I
mm,
looked at Azure and I'm like, hey, we've got, a number of products that we can directly attach to Azure. I'm going to stick everybody's desktops in Azure.
mm,
And that's how that became our new kind of corporate enterprise governance, environment, right? So
mhm,
everything enterprise or corporate tooling, desktop management, security compliance, that all goes into Azure. Now we're kind of platforming that again, and now we're growing our Azure platform to host, client POCs, right? So this is
mm.
again another kind of growth and iteration of an established platform being Azure.
Maybe just to play a little of that back. So what I heard is, first there's, expansion of the core kind of network footprint, for business reasons, like you mentioned, the Mercantile Exchange in Chicago being a driver of why you had to spin up in 350 Cermak, right? And over time, as new applications are coming into, call it the network or the infrastructure, some of them are advantaged by having like the capabilities of a public cloud like AWS and so on. Here, like one of the things I heard, Charles, is a great example of what we talked about just a few minutes ago, like security right at the foundations, right? You thought from sort of first principles about like how do we want to connect the public cloud into our broader infrastructure strategy, and applied, call it like a direct connection philosophy right from the very beginning, because you're thinking about security at the foundational level. And then, other clouds like Azure have come into the picture as other kinds of applications come online. So I think what I hear now is like your network is many and varied in some ways, right? But it has some foundational principles that are kind of applied. And then as new applications are coming into the picture, the other thing I think I heard is you're figuring out, how to leverage the opportunity of those new applications to put new foundations in place that help you do more over time. Does that all sound about right?
100%.
That's really great. Like what you just described, and we don't often get to, have a conversation like this one with somebody who's been really end to end and, from almost day one of a network to something as complex as this is, I think, a really great view or lens into what drives complexity in a network over time, what drives and what do you need to think about as new applications are coming into the network. So it's really helpful to hear this. So one of the things I'm curious to pick your brain on a little bit, um, today, right? Like with all the expansion that's happened and is continuing to happen, like, what are some of the big problems? What are some of the big challenges in like day-to-day, operations and management and like continued expansion and big new initiatives with respect to the network specifically?
Operationally, knock on wood, from the network side of things, one of the things that, or one of the principles that I try to drive home, with my infrastructure is never be the problem.
Hmm.
Never be the block, never be in the middle. Stand your ground and do what is, secure, what is principled, but business revenue is first. Um,
Hmm.
Sorry, I lost my place. Could you wind it back? I'm sorry.
No, 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 it's all good. So, we're talking about some of the operational challenges of a network like this. And by the way, like I absolutely resonate with this idea. Like, in my infrastructure, operations and businesses and so on, like, uh, the more people hear about us, the worse we're doing generally, right?
Yes.
Like, we want to be enablers, right? So that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yep. So we really don't have day-to-day operational issues. I would say at most our probably our most frequently repeating issue is a VPN is stuck, and I've got to go in and clear the security association and bounce the VPN and stuff like that. Um, that's an indicator to me that the network is healthy. Um, and of course, all of our monitoring and everything like that. But
Mm,
typically typically, if a problem presents, I can tie it back to the exact change that we did that introduced that problem, and that's really also another hallmark of a design principle that I have, and I'm sure there's something more official, for it, but I call it a clear line of demarcation.
mm,
I make sure that, you know, I want to be able to guarantee you that I can kind of place a packet in my head. What I do is the network is kind of set up in such a way that I know where there are kind of clean handoffs between kind of my, my organization, which is my core, um, and um, it helps me not only predict, you know, where packets are or are having an issue, it also can help me understand if we have this weird application issue that's showing some kind of weird hiccup off in a corner. That hiccup will stay isolated to that corner and only affect itself. Meaning,
mm,
my application team, or not my application, but the operations application team has been enabled to the point that they can fix these issues on their own uh, because of not only that line of demarcation that I just described, but because of how we monitor things, right? We
mm.
monitor things in such a way that the network does not create false positives, nor does it even, nor do we want to ever create a positive, outage.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
So we create all these tools and all these different platforms to give the operations teams exactly what they need to give them exactly where they need to go because they're the ones that are still the boots on the ground. They're still the ones that are up at 2 o'clock in the morning taking care of problems. I don't want them to believe that they need to get the network involved because the network really just should be transient, pass through, get me from
Hmm.
point A to point Z.
That's really helpful. I got it. And so, like, kind of what I hear there is, um, your like your principled uh, build or approach to building the infrastructure, has enabled you to be pretty proactive operationally, so that like you're not dealing with day-to-day issues, and most of your challenges are probably like forward thinking, right? Like strategic challenges, right? Like, hey, we want to expand in this way. Let's think about how to do that, as opposed to we're drowning in tickets, right?
Right. And if I can't do that exact strategy, and that dealing with dealing with future problems, if I can't do that, then I can't plan effectively. I don't want to be dealing with noise. And if we are dealing with noise, we need to lower that noise so we can continue to focus on what is important.
No, that's really helpful. Uh, One other topic, sort of segueing from this, is network automation. And I think, like in our community, there's a huge groundswell generally in interest in network automation. Almost everybody in and around NetBox somehow is, I usually describe it as on that journey somehow, maybe right at the start of it, right? Just beginning to think about like, how do I eliminate manual toil and eliminate, the risk of human error and those kinds of things, but, really wrapping their heads around it. And then, as like, we have folks in our community who are super advanced here and for whom, tons of the day-to-day operations of the network are driven by automation. How does network automation fit in for you and Flyer? How do you think about it? Like, how's that journey progressed?
Um, to be completely honest, from a network automation perspective, we have none. And it's not for, the lack of trying or anything like that. It's just network automation hasn't fit the mold completely, but we've made all of the right steps in the right direction to be prepared for that when we are ready to jump off and do that. Which I think is probably what brought me back to NetBox Cloud. Um, I'm bringing on staff to manage the network with me, so this is a fantastic jump off point
Mm,
for us because I'm bringing in fresh eyes that can step back and see for me where I can't see, where automation may be benefiting us or the lack of automation is holding us back because this network is my baby. I know it, like I said before, I know every screw in the rack, right? Um, but that's just why I acknowledge I will have blind spots because
hmm
I'm that close to it. And we're at a point now that I'm bringing these people in, and they're gonna be the ones that are gonna be using NetBox Cloud, and all of the different automation tools that I know we need. I just don't know where exactly yet.
I love that actually, Charles. So like what you really just said there is, it's a journey that you're on, right? Like you've laid the right foundations, you've thought ahead and prepared yourself and your network, right? To lean into automation, but you're early in the journey, right? And the other thing you said that I really love is, um, this recognition you've been with this network for a long time, right? And sometimes, a different point of view or a different perspective is really valuable. This is why, I mentioned this at the outset of the podcast. You and I spent some time together last week with a bunch of other, NetBox cloud customers, and that's why I love those kinds of conversations too, because you get, this triangulation of perspective on how people think about operating their networks and are automating them. That's to no small degree, that's the purpose of a conversation like this one too, is to share with others. That's really great. Now you obviously you mentioned NetBox Cloud. Uh, you mentioned earlier to me that you're not new to NetBox. You've been using NetBox, to some degree for sounds like 5, 6 years at least. Um, can you just talk about like what led you to NetBox in the first place, half a decade ago or so? Like what led you to discover it and what was that initial use case like?
Um, I would say probably the same reasons why I still am at NetBox today. It's well, using NetBox today. It 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 has a very unique market space, I think, in that uh, it has the ability to be used in massively large networks because it's an IPAM, right? Um, but it's also very straightforward and easy to use. It has all of these data modeling things and everything that occurs, and it can very quickly give a holistic picture, of the environment. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to stick with NetBox, and it had nothing to do with NetBox, and it just had to do with shifting priorities and stuff like that. For the better part of like 2 or 3 years, I was maintaining a NetBox on premise,
Hmm
but it got to the point that I couldn't keep up with it with Python updates, Napalm updates, just even the Juniper firmware updates, right? They were starting to rapidly change some of their outputs, and Napalm expects very certain outputs. So some of these things were just, and I ran out of time, so I just kind of put NetBox into, or I put the whole IPAM conversation in my head into a box, into a corner, labeled NetBox, and I was like, I'll come back to this when I have the time, because when I look at other IPAMs or other DCIMs, to me they just don't compete. Um, and this is where I think NetBox has that edge, because it's Django. It's very easy to move that installation around, as well as backing it up, restoring it, testing it. Whereas you look at some other, competitor type products, and this is not a paid advertisement or anything, but I'm just saying that when we look at some of the other IPAMs or DCIMs, they are insanely large in the scale that they do, that they don't even really do IPAM. They do asset management with an IP
Hmm.
address Excel spreadsheet attached to it. This has been where my love for NetBox has been for years. And when I saw the notification, or the website for NetBox Cloud being available, I jumped on it immediately.
Yeah, I get you. I mean, like, again, not to spend too much time on the cloud piece, but I think the operational element, that's not why people love NetBox, right? They don't generally want to spend their time running and maintaining and managing the life cycle of this thing. They want to use these really powerful models that are super expressive and this easy tool for managing and documenting the network, and that's where the real value is. And so, obviously, glad you're back to NetBox as a result of that. I think what I heard there is like the biggest role for NetBox for you. I mean, IPAM is a big piece of it. Documentation of the network and the resources of the network is really important. Um, I'm just curious if you can, like, what does that mean, right? Like, what's a typical problem maybe that you're looking to NetBox to go solve on a day-to-day basis? Like, is there a troubleshooting exercise where NetBox is really core to it for you, or a planning exercise? What are some of the problems you end up solving with NetBox because you can document everything?
Um, it serves, two initiatives that I have going. One of which is the platform enablement, which is, arming our operations tools with the tools that they need to, more rapidly support our customers, right? So if they're waiting on me to confirm, who owns, patch panel ID number, blah 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 blah
Mm,
blah blah blah. They don't need to wait on me. They don't need to wait on our data center providers. They can just pop open NetBox Cloud, go to the circuit, see it, they're done. They just
mm,
cut out 8 hours, 2 business days of, conversations, emails, and stuff like that, by just cracking open one tool, looking at it, and going right to where it is. Um, and it also serves my design principles of lines of demarcation, because actually the way uh, NetBox presents its information between, rack and uh, device and device component, the way it's structurally organized, it actually aligns
mm,
kind of with my design principles of my infrastructure. So from a training perspective, it also helps me reinforce that mentality, where I can say, okay, if you need to look up circuit information, circuit right here, and it's right there in NetBox, and it just helps create that consistent
mm,
familiarity of thinking about A is A and B is B. So if I need to look up circuit information, I can look at NetBox and very clearly see a section that says circuits. IPAM, I need to validate, So it's just it reinforces, a number of design principles with the network, and in doing so, it assists in our larger initiatives and strategies.
This is where I guess this is kind of obvious, but like to me, so much of the success of NetBox comes from the fact that it was built by Jeremy, a network engineer, right? Really with how networks are actually built and operated in mind as this model ecosystem has been built out. And so, in fact, it's really representative of like real operational architectures of the network, which is not often the case with other software in this space that's built by software developers,
Yeah.
not necessarily network practitioners. That's really helpful. Maybe just one last kind of netboxy question for you, Charles, which is, I got some input from you last week and from, others in our community and customers last week. Um, but I guess I'd like to ask you, big picture, like where do you hope NetBox heads? Any big hopes for the project, or things that you think are important for the community to be thinking about into the future as we continue to build this thing?
I guess I'd have to say, that I always hope that NetBox will, remember its roots. Like, like you just touched on it, that it was made, it was made by software, engineer Jeremy, and I believe that it will always remember its roots and it won't leave the people like me behind. Um, I think that this is a space where a product could, platform into such growth that people that are like, myself, my organization, one, two, three people, managing, these global networks, we may not follow a traditional enterprise, size, but the
Mm,
size of my network is substantially enterprise large. So I hope that NetBox will stick with me, and I'll stick with NetBox.
yeah, I'll just echo one thing you said there. Networks are becoming bigger and more complicated, and networking teams are not, right? And
Yeah.
so as you've grown this thing over the years, you're doing all the time more with less, and that is true of so many people in the Netbox community. And I think that right there kind of pinpoints, a real significant dimension, at least of my hopes for the project and the projects to come in and around NetBox. And we want to make it possible for network operators to expand their networks in the ways that they need to without having to grow their teams, unsustainably. So
Yes.
that's really great to hear. Well, I actually think, I think we're at a good stopping point here. We had a really great, far-ranging conversation. So, why don't we start to wind this down? Charles, thank you so much for joining and just sharing all these thoughts with us today. I think there's a lot of inspiring thoughts and, really thought-provoking elements of this conversation for everyone who's going to listen to this. And I'll also just say thanks to, as always, the NetBox community, the network automation communities for just tuning in and helping each other out and all the contribution. And I'll see you all next time.
Thank
Thanks,
you.